Hello guys, and welcome back to another episode of my lecture. On today's episode, I'll be talking about disqualification of certain persons for directorship as well as vacation of office for directors. So let's go straight to today's lecture. So when we are talking about disqualification of certain people from being directors, the very important provision for us to interrogate will be section 283 of Cama. And what does section 283 of Cama say? It says that the following persons shall be disqualified from being directors. A, an infant, that is a person under the age of 18 years. B, a lunatic or a person of unsound mind. C, a person suspended or removed under section 288 of the Act. Now, section 288 of the Act is talking about removal of directors. So once you have been removed under section 288 of the Act, by virtue of section 283 sub C, it means that you can no longer be a director in that particular company. Section 283D says a person disqualified under section 279, section 280 and section 284. Section 279 talks about the provision as to insolvent persons acting as directors. Section 280 talks about restraint of fraudulent persons, while section 284 talks about the vacation of office of directors. And then the last one is a corporation other than its representative appointed to the board for a given term. So according to section 283E of Cama, only natural persons can serve as directors and not artificial entities like companies. In some countries, artificial entities like companies can be directors. For example, as we saw in the Ray Holland's case. Now, when we are talking about directorship, it's quite easy for us to know that, an infant cannot be a director, that is a person under 18, or a lunatic cannot be a director. But where could be subject of litigation would be section 288, where a person is removed and then he wants to bring himself back for re-election. The provision already bars such a person and says, no, you cannot come for re-election. Also, we have to look at section 279, section 280, and section 284. Most importantly is section 283E that says a corporation, which means automatically a corporation cannot be a director in another company. The corporation can only be if it is represented. So when we are looking at the directors in a company, when we are looking at directors in First Bank Limited, let's say there's a company called Cabri cannot be a director in First Bank Limited. However, Mr. Ajayi for Cabri can be a director in First Bank Limited. Do you understand? The provision says a corporation other than its representative. So which means a representative of that corporation can be made a director on the board. So like I said earlier, Mr. Ajayi, who is a representative of Cabri, can represent Cabri on the board of First Bank. So Cabri cannot sit as a director, but Mr. Ajayi can sit as a director on the board of First Bank, which is unlike what we will find in other jurisdictions, like in the Ray Holland case. You would remember that Ray Holland talks about a case where Mr. and Mrs. Holland, who were directors of Paycheck Directors, decided to open 42 composite companies, and then Paycheck Director was the sole director in each of those companies. Now you will see that if it were in line with Cama, that would be wrong, because it would contravene section 283 sub E, which says that a corporation solely cannot be a director. It must act through its representative. So we then go to the next, which is section 284 of Cama, that talks about the vacation of office of directors. Now, Subsection 1 says that the office of directors shall be vacated if the director A ceases to be a director by virtue of section 277 of the Act. Do not forget that section 277 of the Act is the section that mandates a director, if the article so provides, to hold share qualification. Now, it says, according to this provision, that the moment that particular director ceases to hold that share qualification, you must read section 2772, 2773 in line with section 284A to say that he automatically ceases to be a director. And if he acts after he ceases because of lack of the required share qualification, then he is no longer a de jure director but a de facto director, where he continues to act. Now, when we look at section 284 sub 1b, it tells us when a person becomes bankrupt or makes any arrangement or composition with his creditors. Sub 1c, where a person becomes prohibited from being a director by reason of order made under section 280 and 281. Do not forget that section 280 talks about restraint of fraudulent person, while section 281 talks about appointment of director for life. And then we go on to section 284D that tells us when a person becomes of unsound mind. We have to read that in line with section 283B to say that as at the point of appointment, if the person is a lunatic or a person of unsound mind, then is disqualified from being a director. But while he was appointed, he was of sound mind, he was sane, he wasn't a lunatic. If during the course of his directorship he becomes a lunatic or a person of unsound mind, then this provision tells us that he automatically ceases to become a director. However, I want to point it out that if during his lucid moments he acts as a director and the company knew that he was acting as a director and acquiesced, then he would be a de facto director and his act will bind the company. And then lastly, where he resigns his office by notice in writing to the company. The moment he resigns, he vacates his office as a director. Now, subsection 2 of section 284 tells us that where a director presents himself for re-election, a record of his attendance at the meeting of the board during the preceding 1 year shall be made available to members at the general meeting where he is to be re-elected. So as we can see in this class, we've covered disqualification of certain persons from being directors as well as vacation of office of directors. So in my next class, we proceed to rotation of directors as well as other things. So I will see you in my next class.